I've always loved the freedom that comes with RV camping. Rolling into a new place with nothing but a tank of gas, a sense of adventure, and your whole life packed behind you. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the Ruby Mountains, Nevada. I swear, this story isn't made up. I've told it to friends, and most of them laugh it off or say I probably dreamt half of it. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. It started late last September. I was doing a solo RV trip across the western U.S., chasing the last bits of summer before the snow rolled in. I had been in Idaho and decided to cut down into northeastern Nevada. The Ruby Mountains looked like a perfect spot. Beautiful, isolated, quiet. That's exactly what I wanted. I rolled into Lemoyle Canyon around 4:30 p.m., found a decent pull-off near a trailhead, and parked. The scenery was unbelievable. Jagged peaks, golden trees just starting to turn, and that perfect, eerie kind of silence you only get way out in the wilderness. I had no cell service, but that didn't bother me. I was planning on staying just one night. After cooking up a simple dinner inside the RV, I sat out on a camp chair with a blanket and watched the sky fade from gold to dark blue. Around 9:30 p.m., I packed up and got ready to crash. That's when things started getting weird. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a sharp tapping sound, 3 taps, on the side of the RV. Not a branch, not a squirrel. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded too deliberate. I froze. Then I opened the door and stepped out with a flashlight. Nothing. Not a single sound in the trees. No movement. I told myself it was probably a bird or an animal brushing past, but deep down I knew that wasn't it. At around 1:47 a.m., I remember because I looked at the clock. I was jolted awake by what I can only describe as footsteps circling the RV. Heavy, slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel. I didn't move, I barely breathed. Then it stopped. 5 minutes later, the back window of the RV fogged up from the outside. I know that sounds insane, but I watched it happen, like someone, or something, was breathing on it. I sat in complete silence, clutching the handle of a camping axe I kept under the bed. Then came the whispers. I swear to you, I heard whispering right outside my RV. Not talking, whispering. I couldn't make out the words. It was like 2 people, arguing softly. But the weirdest part? One of the voices didn't sound human. It had this wet, crackling texture to it, like it was bubbling. I stayed up the entire night waiting for the sun. As soon as lights started spilling over the mountains, I jumped out of the RV and walked the area. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. The back window was still fogged in a single oval shape, like a mouth had pressed against it. I packed up and drove out of the Ruby Mountains that morning, faster than I ever had before. I've camped in over 30 different national forests and parks, but I will never go back to the Ruby Mountains. Whatever is out there, it wasn't just wildlife, and it wasn't friendly, so if you're ever tempted to boondock out there alone, don't. Trust me, some places aren't meant to be camped in, especially when the night feels like it's watching you. My name's Frank Delaney. Retired Army, 26 years in service, most of that in logistics. I'm not the kind of man who scares easy. I've seen some stuff, both overseas and at home. But what happened to me last year in the Ruby Mountains, I still think about it every night before I fall asleep. It was October, my favorite time to be out on the road. I had just started a solo RV trip through Nevada, looking for a little peace and quiet. The Ruby Mountains had been recommended to me by another camper I met at a rest stop. God's country, he called it. He wasn't wrong. The place is stunning. Wild, remote, and haunting in a way that makes your bones feel ancient. I found a small clearing off a dirt road near Harrison Pass. It was remote, real remote. No cell signal, no hikers, not even animal sounds that first day, just quiet. I set up camp, grilled some steaks, poured myself a bourbon, and sat outside watching the sunset. I even remember saying out loud, "This is the life." Around 11 p.m., I was lying in bed, dozing off, when I heard something slam against the side of the RV. Not a knock, a slam. I grabbed my flashlight and .45 and went outside. I did a full sweep, nothing. No animals, no trees close enough to hit the rig. Just cold wind and pitch black. I shrugged it off and went back to bed. But then, at exactly 3:03 a.m., I was jolted awake by what sounded like fingernails scratching the roof. Slow, dragging, like someone crawling up there. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the ceiling vent hatch to peek out. I swear to God, I saw a hand, pale, long fingers, and it vanished as soon as my light hit it. I climbed out of the RV with my gun drawn and scanned the roof. Nothing. But when I jumped down, I found fresh claw marks running across the top of the RV, like someone had tried to pry it open. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I was going to pack up and leave, but something told me to stay one more night. Maybe it was pride. Maybe stupidity. I reinforced the windows, kept my gun next to me, and made a fire outside to keep watch. At 2:41 a.m., every single motion light I had set up went out, one by one. Not all at once, one by one. Then I heard whispering again, just like the night before. Except this time it was inside the RV. I stormed in, gun drawn, nobody. Everything looked untouched. But in the condensation on the window by my bed, there were 2 handprints. One set looked human. The other? It had only 4 fingers and was long, too long. I got in the driver's seat, didn't care about the leveling blocks or camp gear. I drove straight down that dirt road in the dark. It took me over an hour to reach pavement, but I didn't care. Here's the kicker. 3 days later, camped in Utah, I found those same 4-fingered handprints on the back of the RV again. I don't know what I brought with me out of those mountains, but I haven't camped alone since. And to whoever's hearing this, don't go chasing silence in the Ruby Mountains. Some things out there hear it too, and they might just follow you home. My name is Samantha Reyes. Most people online know me as Sam on the Road. I've been living in my RV full-time for a little over 2 years now, vlogging everything. National parks, ghost towns, quirky roadside attractions, you name it. But what happened to me in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada? I didn't vlog any of it. In fact, I almost deleted all my footage from that trip. I've only recently gotten the courage to talk about it. It was early October, and I was on my way from Salt Lake City to California, taking the scenic route through Nevada. A few subscribers had messaged me about Lamoille Canyon in the Ruby Mountains, saying it was a hidden gem for fall colors and solitude. Solitude sounded perfect. I had been dealing with burnout and some personal stuff. I needed time alone. I arrived around 3 p.m. The light was golden, the canyon stunning. I found this quiet spot off a narrow dirt road, no other campers in sight. I set up the tripod, filmed some drone shots, did a quick blog entry, then made dinner. It was peaceful, too peaceful. Night 1 started off normal, but around 2 a.m. I woke up with the strongest feeling that someone was standing outside the RV. No sounds, no lights, just presence. I grabbed my phone to check my security cam app, which was linked to motion sensors. Nothing, no alerts. But then, as I stared at the screen, I watched, in real time, as the camera feed glitched and then cut out. I jumped out of bed and peeked through the blinds. My fire pit was still smoldering from earlier, casting just enough light. And that's when I saw it. At the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 feet away, was a figure. It was tall, still, no flashlight, no gear, just standing there. I thought maybe it was a hiker who got lost, until I noticed something that still gives me chills. The figure didn't move, not even a sway, not even to breathe. I slammed the blinds shut and sat in silence for the rest of the night, clenching the small knife I kept in the drawer. The next morning, I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe a tree stump. Maybe I was overtired. I decided to stay one more night, but I moved the RV slightly, turning it so the door faced the main dirt road instead of the woods. Big mistake. That night, the motion sensors went off. This time, they didn't just go off. They triggered in sequence, like someone, or something, was walking around the RV in a slow, steady circle. I grabbed my phone to record it, but as soon as I hit record, the screen glitched again. Static, like interference. Then came the whispering. I know how this sounds. I know I sound crazy, but I heard whispering. Female voices, soft, like chanting. I couldn't understand the words. Suddenly, my back window, covered by a blackout curtain, let out this crack like something smacked it from the outside. Not a rock, not an animal, a hand, a flat hand. I grabbed my keys, started the engine, and floored it. I didn't even check my mirrors. I just drove. 15 miles of bumpy dirt road in pitch black night, praying I wouldn't crash. When I finally got to the main road, I pulled over to catch my breath. And that's when I noticed something on the RV's side mirror. A smear. Greasy, dark, and in the shape of a handprint. I stayed in a motel the next night. Didn't sleep. Just stared at the footage I had managed to record earlier that day. There was one drone clip right before sunset, where I caught something strange on camera. At the edge of the trees. A shape, a shadow. It wasn't there in the next frame. I didn't include that footage in the vlog I uploaded later. I cut the entire Ruby Mountains trip out. It didn't feel right. And I've never gone back, not even driven through that area. Whatever is out there, watches, waits, and it knows when you're alone. So, if you ever take your RV into the Ruby Mountains, thinking you're gonna find peace and quiet, just make sure something else doesn't find you first. Name's Derek Vaughn, retired out of the Las Vegas Fire Department after 20 years. Traded in the sirens and city lights for open skies and back roads. I built my rig from the frame up. Solar-powered, off-grid beast. Tougher than most folks I meet on the road. But I'll say this once. The Ruby Mountains in Nevada, don't go. That forest doesn't want you there. I rolled in mid-September trying to outrun the heat down south. Wanted isolation, quiet, clean air. Heard Lemuel Canyon was beautiful and remote. Checked all my boxes. I set up camp in a spot about 6 miles up a trail road. No hookups, no people. Just silence and pine. My kind of paradise. That first night, the weather dropped fast. Typical high-altitude chill. I had a fire going. Was cooking some elk steaks I'd brought along when I noticed something odd. All the sounds stopped. Crickets. Wind. Even the trees seemed like they stopped breathing. I've been in wildfire situations where the air gets that still. It's a warning, a shift. Then I heard what I thought was a branch crack. But it wasn't just one, it was several, spaced out. Like footsteps, big ones. I've tracked animals before. These weren't elk, not bear either. No huffing, no snorts, just presence. I stood still for a long time, hand on my belt knife, listening. Whatever it was, it circled my camp. Once, twice, Then silence again. I stayed up most of the night, rifle loaded, fire high. Nothing more happened. But the next morning, things got weirder. There were footprints around the RV, bare, human-looking, but huge. I wear a size 12 boot, and these were longer, maybe a size 16 or 17. Deep impressions, too, like the thing was heavy. I checked the trees nearby. Some of the bark had been peeled. Not clawed, peeled in strips, like something with hands had done it. I should have left right then, but I'm stubborn. Firefighter mindset, assess, adapt, hold the line. I stayed another night. Second night, I wake up to banging. 3 slow, heavy bangs on the roof of my RV. I grabbed the flashlight and climbed out through the side. Nothing. No tracks. No animals. Just those pine trees looming like sentinels. I walked around the rig, and I swear to you, I felt watched. Not, there's a coyote in the bushes, watched, studied. When I got back inside, I tried to sleep, but right around 3:17 a.m., my radio came on. Let me be clear, this thing isn't connected to anything. It's a ham radio, analog, with no automatic power. It switched on and started picking up static. Then, voices. Not clear, not English, just low, droning, like chanting. I unplugged the whole damn unit, still kept talking. At that point, I grabbed my gear, loaded the RV, drove until the sun came up. Didn't stop to pack. Left the fire pit still smoking. When I got back into cell range, I checked my dash cam footage from the night before. Most of it was corrupted, but one frame, just one, caught something in the rear camera. A tall, pale figure walking upright across the road behind me as I pulled away. No hair, no clothes, eyes reflecting white in the brake lights. I've camped in some haunted places, old battlefields, abandoned mines. But that thing in the rubies, it wasn't human, and it didn't want me there. So here's my advice to any RVers who think they're gonna find peace and solitude in those mountains. Don't confuse silence for safety. Some places aren't meant to be camped in. Some places are guarded, and if you hear 3 knocks on your roof in the dead of night, don't open the door. Just drive. My name is Marcus Hale. I've been a wildlife photographer for over a decade. I've camped alone in the Everglades, tracked bears in Alaska, and slept through blizzards in the Rockies. I don't scare easy. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't even flinch when I hear coyotes howl at night. But what happened to me in the Ruby Mountains last fall shook me. I was on assignment for a magazine, working on a piece about lesser-known migration routes in the western U.S. I'd read that the Ruby Mountains were home to a rare mule deer migration corridor, and it was largely untracked by tourists. Exactly my kind of spot. I loaded up my RV with food, camera gear, and drone equipment. My plan was to spend 5 days completely off-grid. No towns, no signals, no people. Day 1 was paradise. The colors were exploding. Golden aspens, snow-dusted peaks, crisp mountain air. I hiked out a few miles with my Canon, set up motion-triggered cameras, even captured footage of a mountain lion from a distance. But that night, something was wrong. I woke up at 2:12 a.m. to this sound, low and rhythmic, like a distant drum. But it wasn't a drum, it was coming from beneath the RV. Thump, thump, thump. I lay there, frozen, trying to rationalize it. Maybe an animal rubbing against the undercarriage. But it was too slow, too deliberate. I waited, holding my breath until it stopped. In the morning, I crawled underneath to check it out. Nothing, no prints, no damage, just a strange pattern of dust wiped clean in a circle. That afternoon, I flew my drone over a narrow ridge about half a mile from camp. Reviewing the footage, I saw something weird. In one frame, near the base of a cliff, there was a dark shape, standing still, like a person, but too tall. I zoomed in. The figure had no features, just a long black silhouette standing in a clearing. In the next frame, gone. I hiked out to that spot with my telephoto lens, but there was nothing there. Just trees and rocks and silence. That night, it got worse. Around 3 a.m., my trail cams, 5 of them, started flashing one by one. Motion detected. I checked the footage in the morning, and heck, there was something in all 5 shots, but never the same shape twice. In one, it looked like a man crouched on all fours. In another, like a tall figure with bent legs. In another, just eyes. Eyes inhuman. Glowing faint red, watching the camera. I wanted to leave, but the main trail was blocked by a fallen tree from a storm that had rolled in overnight. I had to wait until the road dried. That night was the longest of my life. I tried to sleep with a hunting knife and flare gun beside me, but then something tapped on the side of the RV. Not hard, just a tap, like it wanted me to know it was there. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then I heard something even worse, my own voice, a recording, playing from outside. I had done a video journal on my phone earlier that week talking to the camera, and now something was playing it back to me, word for word. I peeked out the tiny window near the bed, and there, right at the tree line, was a figure. Long, slender, and its head was tilted at a sick angle, as if it were listening to my recording. The next morning, I didn't even eat. I cleared branches, got the RV unstuck, and drove without stopping for 8 hours straight until I reached Elko. I checked all my equipment in a motel room. Every memory card from the trail cams, corrupted, my drone footage, glitched and pixelated where that figure was, like it didn't want to be seen. I never turned in that assignment. I told the magazine I lost the footage in a storm. The Ruby Mountains may look peaceful, they may feel untouched, but I promise you, something is up there, something old, something that doesn't want to be filmed, and it watches you, especially when you're alone. This happened 2 years ago. I haven't told many people. Not because I'm scared they won't believe me, but because part of me still hopes it wasn't real. But it was. I was on a solo trip through Nevada. I'd been RV camping for weeks. I liked the isolation, the quiet. The idea that I could park in the middle of nowhere and not see another soul for days. The Ruby Mountains were just supposed to be another stop. I found a spot deep in the forest, way off any official campsite. Dirt road, patchy cell service, just enough space between the trees for my RV and a small fire pit. First day was peaceful. I hiked, I cooked over the fire, I read until the sun went down. Then night came. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to scratching. Not on the RV door, not the windows, but above me, on the ceiling. It wasn't a branch. I checked the trees before parking. Nothing overhead. It sounded like fingers, long, slow drags, then silence. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, I convinced myself it was an animal, a raccoon, a bird, anything. The next morning, I climbed up to check. Nothing, no prints, no scratches, no debris, just dust. Still, I stayed another night. That's when everything changed. Sometime after midnight, the scratching returned. This time, faster, like it was trying to get in. Then, the motion lights outside flicked on. I looked through the side window. There was something at the tree line, not a person, not an animal, just a shape, like it was crouching, watching. And then it moved, not walked, crawled, low to the ground, disturbingly fast, around the RV. I couldn't see it for a few seconds until it darted past the front windshield. Pale, thin, almost spider-like. I froze. I didn't make a sound, didn't even breathe. I just watched as the motion light clicked off. Then came the tapping. Not at the windows this time, from under the RV. That's when I realized, whatever it wasn't trying to get in, it was already there. I grabbed my keys, didn't pack, didn't check anything. I started the RV and drove, fast, through the trees, over rocks, no GPS, just instinct. I didn't stop until I hit a main road. When I finally pulled over, I got out, shaking. I checked under the rig. There were handprints in the dust on the undercarriage. Human-shaped, but long, almost stretched, like fingers that weren't made to belong to anything natural. I've camped all over the country, desert, mountains, swamps, but I'll never set foot in the Ruby Mountains again. Whatever's living in those woods, it's been there a long time, and it doesn't want company. We're Alex and Bree. Been together for 3 years. We're not thrill seekers or ghost hunters. We just love nature, peace, and unplugging from city life. So when we planned our fall road trip through Nevada, we picked a remote spot in the Ruby Mountains for a 3-day RV camping getaway. The first day was everything we hoped for. The trees were turning golden, the air was crisp, and we had the entire forest to ourselves. We hiked, cooked, stargazed. No cell service, no noise, just us. The first weird thing happened that night. At around 2:30 a.m., I, Bree, woke up. Alex wasn't in bed. I called out for him, nothing. I peeked through the front curtain, and I saw the RV door slowly closing. I opened it, stepped out, and there he was, just standing in the clearing, not moving, staring at the tree line. I whispered, "Babe? What are you doing?" He didn't respond. When I touched his shoulder, he finally blinked, turned, and said, "I just thought I heard something calling me." I laughed nervously. "Calling you?" He shrugged it off, but something about the way he said it chilled me. Like he didn't even realize he'd left the RV. Next morning, he barely remembered any of it. Said he thought it was a dream. Later that day, on a trail near a shallow stream, we found something we couldn't explain. Dozens of animal bones, clean, arranged in spiral patterns, like someone, or something, had placed them there on purpose. Alex wanted to take photos, but I begged him to leave them alone. He started acting strange after that, quieter, distant. He'd sit for hours, staring out the window or wandering near the tree line like he was waiting for something. The second night was when I knew something was wrong. I woke up to find Alex standing over me, just staring. His eyes were glassy. I asked what he was doing, and he said, "They're coming tonight. I have to be ready." I snapped. "What the hell does that mean, Alex?" But he just laid back down like nothing happened. Around 4 a.m., the lights on the RV flickered. I heard whispering, faint, like it was coming from the trees. And then the tapping started. Slow, rhythmic, on every window, like fingers. I pulled the covers over my head and prayed for morning. By sunrise, everything was quiet. Alex acted like nothing had happened, but he wasn't Alex anymore. He stopped talking about leaving, said we should stay a few more nights, said the forest felt like home now. I told him I was done, and I was driving us out, with or without him. That's when he smiled, a wide, unnatural smile, and said, "They don't want you to leave." I drove anyway. He didn't stop me. He sat silently in the passenger seat the whole time, staring at the forest as it disappeared in the rearview mirror. We got back to the city. He looked the same, sounded the same, but he wasn't the same. He doesn't sleep. He just sits up at night, staring out the window. Sometimes he talks in his sleep. Says things like, "Under the roots. Follow the red moss. They wait in the stone ring." She shouldn't have taken me from them. I don't know what I brought back from those mountains, but it's wearing the face of the man I love. I'm Jack Cole, a photographer who's always chasing that next perfect shot. I travel to remote places, alone, to capture landscapes that few have seen in person. For my latest assignment, I decided to venture into Nevada's Ruby Mountains, known for its vast, untouched beauty. A rare opportunity to shoot the wilderness in its purest form. I parked my truck at the edge of a quiet trail where the mountains loomed ahead like a silent giant. The air was thin and cold, a crisp reminder that I was out of my element. My RV sat parked a mile away from the nearest town. I didn't mind the isolation. In fact, I thrived on it. The first day was perfect for photography. I hiked up the slopes, setting up my camera gear in various locations, capturing the morning light on the jagged cliffs, the shadows of the pines stretching across the meadows. There was a haunting beauty to the place that made every frame feel like it belonged in a nature documentary. As nightfall approached, I set up camp near a secluded lake. The stillness of the water mirrored the darkening sky, creating a reflection so perfect it seemed almost unreal. But as the night went on, I felt something strange. It started as a sensation at the back of my neck, like eyes watching me. I shook it off. I was alone in the wilderness. The only thing out here were the deer and the birds, right? But the feeling didn't go away. Around midnight, I stood outside my RV, looking out over the water, when I heard a rustling in the trees behind me. The kind of rustling you only hear when something large moves through the brush. I turned around quickly, but nothing. Nothing but trees. The feeling of being watched intensified. My breath came out in small clouds in the cold night air, and the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. My camera was still around my neck, so I raised it to take some shots of the night sky, hoping the act of focusing on something might calm me down. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, something moved in the shadows at the edge of the trees. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, or maybe an animal, but the shape stood still for a moment, watching me. I could feel its presence, heavy and deliberate. I quickly snapped a photo, hoping to capture the strange figure. The camera's flash lit up the area for a brief moment, and when the light faded, the figure was gone. I rushed back to the RV, heart racing, and reviewed the shot. My stomach dropped. The figure was there, but it wasn't human. It was tall, hunched, and featureless, like a silhouette that couldn't possibly belong in the natural world. It had an almost unnatural elongation, like it didn't fit into the dimensions of the forest around it. I thought maybe I was imagining things, just a product of exhaustion. But when I checked the time, I realized something even stranger. The picture I'd just taken didn't match the timestamp. The photo was taken minutes before I'd even raised the camera to my eye. Terrified, I packed up my gear and checked every inch of the RV. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I wasn't sure where to go. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours staring at the photos I had taken, hoping I had missed something, hoping it was all a glitch or a trick of the light. But as the night grew deeper, I heard the rustling again. This time, it was closer. I bolted out of bed and grabbed my flashlight. I shone it into the darkness surrounding the RV. That's when I saw it. The shape was standing right outside my window, just beyond the beam of light. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I could feel its eyes on me, but I couldn't make out any details, just darkness. a deep, suffocating blackness. In a panic, I backed up and slammed the door shut, locking it. I tried to start the engine, but the RV wouldn't turn over. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. No connection to the outside world. I was stuck. The next morning, I managed to get the RV running again. I didn't look back as I sped down the trail, not even bothering to grab my camera gear. I couldn't bring myself to look at the photos. I never returned to the Ruby Mountains. The pictures I took that night, well, I deleted them. Every single one. There are no records of what I saw, but I know what I saw. And I know something is out there watching. It's just waiting for the right moment. My name is Henry. I'm 74 years old, and I've lived alone in the Ruby Mountains for nearly 40 years. People think I'm crazy for choosing this life, but they don't understand. This place is peaceful, quiet. It's where I found my peace after the world turned its back on me. I keep to myself. No wife, no kids, just the land and me. I live in an old cabin tucked away near a forgotten trail that's been erased from every map. It's the kind of place where few wander. If they do, they don't stay long. People come and go from the nearby town, but I've always kept my distance. I don't need them, and they don't need me. But lately, something's been different. At first, I thought it was just the solitude, my mind playing tricks on me as I got older. But it's more than that. I'm not imagining things. 2 weeks ago, I heard the voices, low, like murmurs on the wind. I thought maybe it was the animals, or maybe the wind playing with the trees. But I've been around long enough to know when it's the wind and when it's something else. The voices were coming from the direction of the old mine, deep in the woods. The same mine I warned people never to go near. It's been abandoned for decades, but I remember the stories my grandfather used to tell me. Stories about strange happenings there. People disappearing. Shadows moving when no one was around. Things that shouldn't be, lurking in places they shouldn't be. But I ignored it. After all, I've lived here too long to be afraid of the woods. I've seen things I'd rather forget. Then, last night, it happened. I was sitting by my fireplace, sipping on a cup of tea, when I heard something knocking at my door. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal. Someone, or something, was knocking. I got up slowly, feeling a cold chill in the air. I didn't expect anyone. I hadn't had a visitor in years. I opened the door, but there was no one there, just the empty night. The forest seemed quieter than usual, too quiet. I stood there for a moment, listening. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line, watching me. It wasn't a person. It couldn't be. The shape was too unnatural. It was tall, impossibly thin, with long arms that stretched past its knees. It was like it didn't belong, like it was part of the shadows themselves. I couldn't move. My legs felt like stone. And then the voice came. Not from the figure, but from the trees, deep, guttural, like the land itself was speaking. Come closer, Henry. I felt my heart stop. It knew my name. It knew me. I turned and slammed the door shut, locking it. I didn't sleep that night, not a wink. The whole time, I could feel the figure's presence outside. I could feel its eyes on me, watching from the shadows. The next morning, I didn't go outside. I stayed inside my cabin, pacing. The whole place felt wrong, like it was alive, breathing with me. I tried to ignore the whispers that came through the walls. At times, they sounded like my mother's voice, calling me from the other side. Other times, it was a low hum, like something was singing under its breath. That's when I decided I needed to leave. I couldn't stay here anymore. Something wasn't right. I grabbed my things, packed my bag, and started to head for the nearest town. But as I walked down the old trail, I realized that something was following me. I could hear the footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, just a few paces away, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. I thought maybe I was losing my mind, so I kept walking. I kept telling myself it was all in my head. But as the trail wound deeper into the woods, I saw something on the ground. A handprint in the dirt, but it wasn't human. The fingers were long, twisted, and the nails, they weren't like anything I'd ever seen. They were sharp, curved. I knew right then that I wasn't just being followed, I was being hunted. I turned around and ran like I never had before. The sounds in the woods were louder now, scratching, whispering, laughing. I could hear them all around me, just beyond the trees. I don't know how long I ran, but by the time I reached the town, the sun was setting. I didn't look back. I haven't been back to my cabin since. I can't go back. Whatever's out there, it knows me. It knows everything. And I think it's waiting for me to return. We were just a group of college students looking for an adventure. 6 of us, 4 guys, 2 girls, decided to spend our spring break camping in the Ruby Mountains. We were looking for an escape from the chaos of campus life, and the idea of unplugging for a few days in the wilderness sounded perfect. No phones, no distractions, just nature and us. We arrived on the first day of our trip and immediately set up camp. The area was remote. No cell service, no other campers around. Just miles of trees and cliffs stretching as far as we could see. At first, it felt like we were the only people in the world, and that was exactly what we wanted. That evening, we gathered around the campfire. We joked, laughed, and roasted marshmallows. We had all been friends since high school, and it felt like the old days, simple, carefree. But as the fire crackled, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't anything specific, just a sense of unease in the air, but I brushed it off. That night, things started to get weird. Around 1 a.m., we heard a strange sound coming from the woods. A low, guttural growl. We all froze. At first, we thought it might be a bear, but it didn't sound like anything we'd heard before. It wasn't animal. It was human. Almost like a whispering growl, too soft to make out. We shone our flashlights into the trees, but there was nothing there. Still, we convinced ourselves it was just an animal, maybe a cougar, maybe a coyote, and went to bed. The next day, we hiked up to a nearby ridge for a better view. The day was perfect, but the atmosphere felt strange. The further we went, the more we felt as if something was watching us. It wasn't paranoia. There was something there. You could feel it. We reached the top, and the view was breathtaking, but as we snapped photos and admired the landscape, we noticed something odd. In the distance, there was a small clearing in the woods with a single large stone in the center. The way it stood there, so out of place, drew us in. We couldn't resist. We walked over to the clearing, and that's when things started to get really weird. As soon as we stepped into the clearing, the air grew heavier. The trees seemed to close in around us, the sunlight dimming as though a cloud passed overhead. The stone in the middle of the clearing had strange markings on it, symbols we didn't recognize. They looked like something ancient, something not meant for our eyes. We all stood around the stone for a moment, unsure of what we were looking at. Then one of the girls, Jenna, suddenly started acting strangely. She backed away from the stone, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave," she said, her voice shaky. "Now." We tried to reassure her, but she was frantic. "There's something wrong with this place," she insisted. "I can feel it. We shouldn't be here." Before we could calm her down, we heard it again. That low, growling whisper, this time louder, closer. In an instant, the whole group was on edge. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. We turned to leave, but the path back to camp didn't seem right. It was as though the trees were different, the landscape wrong. We tried retracing our steps, but every turn felt like we were going in circles. The further we went, the more lost we became. Panic set in, our phones useless, no signal, no GPS. We tried to use the sun as a guide, but it seemed like the day was moving faster than it should have. By the time the sun began to set, we were completely disoriented. That's when Jenna disappeared. We were walking in a line, and then, just like that, she was gone. We called her name, ran in every direction, but she was nowhere to be found. Her screams echoed in the woods, but they seemed to be coming from every direction. Her voice was distorted, like something was mimicking her. We tried to find her, but the more we searched, the more hopeless it felt. The forest had swallowed her whole. That's when we realized we weren't just lost. We were being hunted. The next few days were a blur. We tried to survive, but it was like the mountain had turned against us. We heard things that weren't real, things that shouldn't exist. The growls, the whispers, the feeling of eyes on us at every turn. It was as if the land itself was alive, and it didn't want us there. One by one, the rest of the group vanished. First Mark, then Sarah, and then Paul. We never saw them again. The last time I saw Tom, he was standing near the clearing, staring at the stone. His eyes were empty, like he was in a trance. I tried to escape. I ran for hours, but the forest wouldn't let me go. It twisted and turned until I was back at the same clearing where it all started. That's when I saw it. The stone was glowing, and the symbols were moving. They seemed to pulse like they were alive, and standing in front of it was Jenna. But she wasn't Jenna anymore. Her face was twisted, her eyes wide and hollow. She was smiling, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I was told I was found on the outskirts of the Ruby Mountains, disoriented and covered in cuts. I don't remember how I got there, and I still don't know what happened to the rest of my friends. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear those whispers, the growls, and I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for someone else to come looking for adventure in the Ruby Mountains. Let me start by saying, I've been RV camping all across the U.S. for years. National parks, deserts, backwoods. I've seen it all. Or, at least I thought I had. Until the night I parked my RV in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada. It was early October. The air had that perfect crisp edge to it. And I was chasing solitude. Just me, my German Shepherd, Duke, and a stretch of sky I couldn't find back home in Vegas. I had gotten a tip from another camper at a gas station in Elko about a remote pull-off spot along the Lamoille Canyon Scenic Byway. He said the view was incredible, and that most people didn't know it existed. That should have been my first red flag. I found the spot just before sundown. It was beautiful, silent, surrounded by thick pines, with the mountains casting long shadows over the valley. No cell service, no lights, just the kind of quiet that feels sacred or haunted. I parked the RV, set up a small fire outside, cracked a beer, and watched Duke sniff around, tail wagging. Everything felt normal until night fell. It started with Duke growling, not barking, just a low, guttural growl, like something was out there that he didn't like. I stepped out with my flashlight, scanned the trees. Nothing. But Duke wouldn't go back inside. He stood at the door, hackles raised, eyes locked on the woods. I figured maybe a coyote or bobcat had wandered too close, So I brought him in, locked the door, and climbed into bed. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I woke up to 3 loud knocks on the side of the RV. Knock, knock, knock. Duke lost it. He ran to the door, barking like crazy. My heart was racing. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously opened the door. No one. I circled the RV, shining the light into the trees. Still nothing. But then, I heard it. Whispers, not far off. Like multiple people talking at once, but just under their breath. I couldn't make out the words, but I swear on my life they were there. I slammed the door shut, locked it again, and sat there in silence. The whispers faded, but the feeling didn't. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was watching me. I tried to sleep, but then the knocking started again. Same 3 knocks, same rhythm, knock, knock, knock. Only this time, it came from the back window. I didn't go check, I just sat there, frozen, holding a kitchen knife like it was going to save me. When the sun finally rose, I didn't pack up. I left. Firewood, chairs, even Duke's bowl, I just drove. About 20 minutes down the road, I hit signal and pulled over to check my phone. I had a new voice message. It was static, just static. And underneath it, a faint whisper. You weren't supposed to come here. I've never been back. I won't even drive near the Ruby Mountains anymore. Maybe there's a logical explanation. Maybe it was just some prank by hikers or some freak atmospheric thing. But I know what I felt that night, and I will never RV camp in the Ruby Mountains again. My name's Cole, and I've been an RV enthusiast for years. I'm not someone who gets spooked easily. I've spent countless nights camping in remote locations, far from the comforts of home. But I'll never forget the one time I camped in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada. What happened out there still haunts me, and I swear I'll never return to that place again. It all started in late autumn when I decided to take a solo trip. I had been itching to explore the Ruby Mountains, one of Nevada's most beautiful yet rugged ranges. It's isolated, remote, and the perfect spot for someone like me who craves solitude. I'd heard rumors of strange occurrences in the area, but I didn't pay them much attention. I thought it was just local lore to add a bit of mystery to the place. I drove my RV into the mountains, taking the long, winding roads through the desert. The landscape was breathtaking. Giant granite peaks, valleys filled with golden brush, and untouched wilderness. I found a perfect spot near a creek, tucked between towering pines. It felt like the kind of place where I could truly disconnect, get some peace, and enjoy the stillness of the mountains. The first night was peaceful. I set up my camp, enjoyed a warm dinner, and filmed some sunset footage. I could hear the faint sound of the creek flowing nearby and the wind rustling through the trees. I thought to myself that this was why I loved RV camping, this quiet, raw beauty of nature. But as the night grew darker, something started to feel off. It wasn't the usual discomfort of being in the wilderness. No, this felt different. It was like I wasn't alone. I chalked it up to the isolation. After all, the Ruby Mountains are remote and animals roam freely at night. I convinced myself it was just the sound of something moving through the brush, perhaps a deer or a coyote. I retreated into the RV, locked the door, and tried to sleep. But that's when the whispers began. I thought I was hearing things at first. A faint sound outside the RV, almost like distant voices. At first, I dismissed it. Probably the wind, right? But then it became clearer. These weren't the sounds of nature. They were words, hushed, almost like a conversation happening just outside my door. I froze. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, shining the beam around the camp. Nothing. Just the stillness of the night, the flickering firelight, and the moon casting long shadows. My heart was pounding. I stood there for a moment, staring into the darkness. But there was no one around. The whispers faded away, and I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I went back inside, double-checked the locks, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a loud thud against the side of the RV, followed by a scraping sound. My heart leapt into my throat. Something was definitely out there. I grabbed my phone to check the security cameras I had set up, but the footage was completely blank. No movement, nothing. Panicking, I opened the RV door again and stepped outside. The air was cold, biting, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. I checked the perimeter again, and that's when I noticed something chilling. Footprints. Barefoot prints. Small, childlike prints in the dirt near the entrance of my RV. The thing that froze me, though, was that they seemed to be leading toward the RV, but there were no prints leading away. No sign of anyone leaving. Just these strange barefoot tracks, and they were fresh. I backed into the RV, locking the door behind me again. I tried to calm myself. Maybe I was just paranoid, maybe it was just a trick of the mind, but the whispers began again. Only now they were closer, almost at the window. They weren't clear, but I could hear a single phrase repeated over and over. "We know you're here." My breath caught in my chest. Suddenly, I felt a sharp jolt. The RV moved, as though something heavy had pushed against it. I stumbled, caught off guard by the force. I rushed to the windows and peered out. There was nothing there, just the trees swaying in the wind. Yet, the sensation of being watched lingered. I had enough. I packed up my stuff in a hurry, not bothering to clean up or take down the tent. I started the RV and drove out of the Ruby Mountains faster than I've ever driven in my life, all the while feeling like something was following me, watching my every move. To this day, I don't know what I encountered out there. I've been back to the Ruby Mountains since, during the day, of course, but I won't ever camp there again. The place, the feeling of being watched, the whispers, the footprints, they all felt wrong. If you ever find yourself near the Ruby Mountains, I'd advise you to do what I didn't. Stay far away from the deep parts of the wilderness, because something's out there and it doesn't want you to leave. My name's Jake, and I've been RV camping for years. There's something about being alone in the wilderness that gives you a sense of freedom, an escape from the noise of the world. I'd camped all over the country, but the Ruby Mountains in Nevada were always on my list. It's one of the most remote and untouched places you can find, and that's exactly what drew me in. It was late September when I made the decision to head out there. I was craving solitude, and the Ruby Mountains were the perfect place for it. I drove up the winding mountain roads, the landscapes changing from arid desert to lush, dense woods. The higher I went, the more isolated it felt. I could tell I was deep in the mountains, where few people ventured. I found a beautiful spot near a quiet lake, nestled between towering pines. The view was breathtaking, and I had the place all to myself. I parked my RV, set up camp, and spent the evening fishing by the lake. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water, and for a moment I thought I had found my perfect spot. But as nightfall descended, a strange feeling settled over me. It wasn't the usual peace of being in nature. No, this felt different. It felt like I was being watched. The forest was silent, but my senses were heightened. I tried to shake it off, convinced it was just my imagination, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. I stayed by the campfire for a while, but eventually retreated into the RV to sleep. I locked the door, pulled the blinds down, and tried to get some rest. I fell asleep quickly, but it didn't last long. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of scraping against the side of the RV. Slow, deliberate scraping. It sounded like something, or someone, was dragging their hand along the metal. My heart began to race. I lay there, perfectly still, listening. The noise stopped for a moment and then came again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the blinds, but there was nothing outside. No animals, no movement. Just the stillness of the night. I was on edge, but I convinced myself it was just an animal. Maybe a raccoon or something, curious about my camp. I went back to bed, but the feeling of being watched never left. The night dragged on, and I barely slept. At dawn, I decided to pack up and move on. I wasn't going to stick around after a night like that. As I stepped outside the RV to break down camp, I noticed something odd. Footprints. They were small, almost childlike, and they led right up to the side of my RV where I had heard the scraping. But what made my blood run cold was that there were no footprints leading away. It was as if the person, or thing, had walked up to my RV and then just disappeared. The prints were fresh, and I could see them clearly in the morning light. I checked around the area, but there was no sign of anyone. I looked up and down the path leading into the woods, but nothing. The silence of the forest was unnerving. As I was packing up my gear, I heard something in the trees. A twig snapped. My head whipped around, but there was nothing there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was lurking just out of sight, watching me. I finished packing as quickly as I could and got in the RV, locking the door behind me. I started the engine and drove off, not looking back. As I descended from the mountains and back onto the main road, the tension in my chest finally began to loosen. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the image of those footprints. Whoever, or whatever, had left them was still out there in those mountains. And they weren't friendly. I haven't gone back to the Ruby Mountains since. There's something about that place, something unsettling about the way the silence weighs on you, like it's hiding something in the shadows. If you ever decide to camp there, just remember one thing. There are things in those mountains that don't want you to leave. And once you've been there, they'll always be watching. My name's Brandon, and I'd always thought I had a pretty good handle on nature. I've spent my fair share of nights camping in the wild, especially in places like the Rockies, the Sierras, and the Adirondacks. But nothing could prepare me for what I encountered in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada. I'd heard about the Ruby Mountains for years, about their beauty, their isolation, and their rugged terrain. It's one of those places that seems untouched by the world, a haven for those who seek solitude. And I'm all about that. So, I decided to take a week-long trip in my RV, planning to camp by one of the many hidden lakes scattered throughout the range. I made my way up into the mountains, the roads getting narrower as I drove higher. It was late spring and the weather was perfect for camping. The wildflowers were in full bloom, the air was crisp, and the scenery was breathtaking. I parked my RV near a small clearing, a quiet spot surrounded by dense trees. It seemed perfect, remote, peaceful, and entirely mine for the week. I spent the first couple of days fishing, hiking, and exploring the area. But the deeper I ventured into the mountains, the more I began to notice something strange. It wasn't the wildlife or the eerie quiet of the forest. It was the feeling that something was out of place. On my third day, I decided to explore a trail that veered off from my camp. It was an old path, overgrown with vegetation, and I could barely make out the way forward. Something in the back of my mind told me to turn around, but curiosity got the better of me. After about an hour of hiking, I came across something unexpected. A cabin. It wasn't a part of any campground or on any of the maps I'd studied. The cabin was old, rustic, even ancient, and it sat at the edge of a small clearing. The logs were weathered, and the windows were covered with thick dust, as if no one had lived there for years. My first thought was that it had been abandoned long ago. Still, something felt off. I approached cautiously, half expecting the door to creak open on its own, but there was no movement. It was eerily still. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The door wasn't locked, and it opened with a soft groan. The air inside was musty, filled with the scent of old wood and mildew. There were remnants of furniture, an overturned chair, a cracked table, and something that caught my eye, an old journal resting on the windowsill. I picked it up and started flipping through the pages. The entries were strange, rambling, almost incoherent at times. But as I read, the tone grew darker. The writer spoke about the shadows in the trees, voices on the wind, and a presence that never left. One entry read, "They watch from the ridge, waiting for me to leave. If you find this, don't stay. They will come for you too." I felt a chill run down my spine as I read those words. I looked around the room, the silence pressing in on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when I heard it. A soft thump coming from above. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly looked up, but there was nothing. The room was empty, the light from the single dirty window casting long shadows across the floor. But the noise came again, louder this time. A slow, deliberate thump, 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 coming from the attic. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the ceiling. Something was up there. I don't know why I did it, but I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight from my pack and made my way up to the attic, my breath coming faster now. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I ascended, each step echoing in the silence. When I reached the top, I shined the light into the dark space. There was nothing there. But then the light flickered, and for just a split second I saw something, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I screamed, stumbling backward, and the light went out. In a blind panic, I rushed back down the stairs, my heart hammering. I didn't care about anything else at that moment except getting out of that cabin. I bolted from the door and didn't stop running until I reached my RV. I packed up my camp as fast as I could, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I didn't even look back at the cabin. I just drove, my hand shaking on the wheel until I was miles away from that place. To this day, I have no idea who or what was in that cabin. But I'm sure of one thing. I'll never set foot in the Ruby Mountains again. Not after what I experienced. There are places in this world where the silence is not peaceful, where the past still lingers, and where the things that live in the shadows won't let you forget them. My name's Ethan, and I've always loved the outdoors. I've camped in all kinds of conditions, from the desert heat to the freezing cold of the northern Rockies. But nothing could prepare me for what happened when I decided to camp in the Ruby Mountains in Nevada. I'd heard the Ruby Mountains were stunning, known for their rugged beauty, hidden lakes, and wild landscapes. I'd been looking for a place to disconnect from everything, and the Ruby Mountains seemed perfect. I packed up my RV and headed out, hoping for some peace and quiet. I found a secluded spot by a small, crystal-clear lake. It was surrounded by towering peaks, and the air was crisp and fresh, the kind of place that felt like you could breathe again, away from the noise of the world. I set up camp, made a fire, and spent the evening enjoying the solitude, watching the sun dip behind the jagged peaks. But as the night wore on, the weather began to change. It wasn't a sudden storm, just a gradual shift, with clouds rolling in from the west. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and the air grew heavier. I didn't think much of it. I'd been through storms before, and I was prepared. By midnight, the wind had turned into a full-blown gust, rattling the RV and shaking the trees. The sky was dark, with only flashes of lightning illuminating the jagged ridgelines. I couldn't see much, but I could hear the roar of the storm picking up, the sound of it echoing through the valley. I decided to stay inside, watching the storm through the small window. As the rain began to pour, the noise outside became deafening. The wind howled, and the trees seemed to bend under the force. But then, just as I was starting to get comfortable, something caught my eye. A figure. I blinked, certain I was seeing things. But when I looked again, I saw it clearly. A dark silhouette, standing just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the flashes of lightning. It was standing still, unmoving, watching me. My heart skipped a beat. The storm was loud, but the figure stood perfectly still, like it was unaffected by the chaos of the night. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just a trick of the light, maybe the shadows playing tricks on me. But then the figure took a step forward. I froze. It was human-sized, but there was something off about the way it moved, unnatural, as if it didn't belong to this world. I watched, paralyzed, as the figure stepped closer to the RV. The lightning flashed again, and for a split second I could see it clearly. It had no face. The figure's head was featureless, just smooth, pale skin. I could barely make out its outline in the dim light, but there was no mistaking the emptiness where its face should have been. My pulse raced, and panic set in. I thought I was going crazy. This couldn't be happening. The figure stopped just a few feet from the RV, standing motionless. Then the air grew still. The wind stopped howling, and the storm seemed to freeze in time. There was an eerie silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The figure reached out with one hand. Its fingers long and pale and lightly tapped on the side of the RV. Tap, tap, tap. I jumped back, knocking over a chair in my panic. The RV shook again, but this time it wasn't the wind. I could feel something, someone, pushing against the side of the RV. I bolted up from my seat, rushed to the door, and slammed the lockdown. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the keys and started the engine. I wasn't staying here for another second. But before I could drive off, something slammed against the window. Bang! I screamed, looking out into the storm, but there was nothing there. The figure was gone. The storm returned to its original ferocity, the wind and rain pounding against the RV. I could barely see through the fogged-up windows. I didn't waste another second. I put the RV into drive and sped down the mountain, my heart racing. I could still feel that presence, like something was following me, watching from the darkness of the trees. As I drove farther down the mountain, the storm slowly faded, but that feeling, the feeling of being hunted, never left me. I spent the rest of the night driving, unable to stop, too afraid to go back to the Ruby Mountains. I haven't returned since. People say the Ruby Mountains are full of beauty and peace, but I've learned that there are some places where the beauty is hiding something far darker. If you ever find yourself out there, especially during a storm, you might want to think twice before you go too deep, because sometimes the wilderness doesn't want you to leave. My name's Sarah, and I've always been an adventurer at heart. I've camped in some of the most remote and beautiful places in the U.S., and the Ruby Mountains in Nevada were no exception. They'd been on my bucket list for years, And finally, in early October, I decided to make the trip. Little did I know this would be my last time camping in the mountains. I arrived at a small secluded campsite nestled at the base of one of the mountain ridges. It was quiet, too quiet, and that eerie stillness was what drew me in. The beauty of the place was undeniable. Crystal clear lakes, towering peaks, and forests thick with pine trees. I set up my RV and was ready to settle in for a few peaceful days of hiking and fishing. On the first day, everything was perfect. I hiked to the lake, watched the sunset from a rocky outcrop, and enjoyed the serenity of the wild. But as night fell, the peace started to feel like something else. A heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press in on me. I sat by the campfire that evening trying to shake the odd sensation, but it didn't go away. The quiet in the Ruby Mountains was unlike any other place I'd been. It wasn't just the usual stillness of nature. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, as I was finishing up by the fire, I heard something. At first, it was just a faint rustling in the trees, but then it became clearer, whispering, soft, almost inaudible whispers coming from the woods. I froze. The sounds were too distinct to be the wind or animals. It sounded like voices, low, hushed voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. My first thought was that maybe someone else was nearby, camping in the area. But when I looked around, I saw nothing. Just the dark silhouette of the mountains against the night sky and the dense forest surrounding me. The whispers grew louder, though still distant. It sounded like it was coming from the other side of the lake. My instincts screamed at me to stay by the fire, but curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed my flashlight, locked the RV door behind me, and made my way toward the lake. The closer I got to the water, the clearer the whispers became. But something was wrong. The voices weren't getting closer. They were moving, circling around me, coming from all directions. They echoed from the trees, but no one was there. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the ground, and I could feel my breath catch in my throat. Then, just as I turned to leave, I saw something in the distance. A figure standing at the edge of the lake. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it didn't move. Its outline was indistinct, like a shadow that didn't belong in the light. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette of a person, or something like a person. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the figure. And that's when I heard the whispers again. But now they were no longer distant. They were right behind me. Go, go, go. The words were clear now, a soft, guttural chant that came from the trees, from the shadows. I whipped around, shining my flashlight into the darkness. But there was nothing there. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran back to the RV, nearly tripping in my haste. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more frantic, as if they were urging me to leave, to get away from the lake, from the mountains, from whatever was out there. I reached the RV and locked the door, my hands shaking. I sat by the window, staring into the night, watching the forest. The whispers didn't stop. They continued, fading in and out, like they were drifting through the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, my ears straining for any sound, waiting for morning. The next day, I packed up and left the campsite early, not looking back as I drove down the mountain. I don't know what I heard that night or who, or what, was whispering to me from the woods. All I know is that the Ruby Mountains weren't as peaceful as they seemed. They held something there, something ancient and quiet, hidden just beneath the surface. I've heard stories about the Ruby Mountains, about strange sounds and people disappearing without a trace. Now, I believe them. I'll never camp there again. Some places are better left undisturbed, My name's Jason, and I've spent most of my life in the outdoors. I've hiked through dense forests, camped on isolated mountaintops, and spent countless nights under the stars. But one summer, my journey led me to the Ruby Mountains of Nevada. I had no idea that trip would haunt me for the rest of my life. It started like any other camping trip. I loaded up my RV, packed my gear, and drove out to the Ruby Mountains, looking for a place to escape the hustle and bustle of daily life. I wanted peace and quiet, and the Ruby Mountains seemed like the perfect place to find it. I found a remote campground nestled at the base of the mountains, surrounded by towering pines and near a beautiful lake. It was secluded, far from the nearest town, and exactly what I was looking for. After setting up camp, I decided to do a bit of hiking the next morning. The area was known for its old trails, some of which weren't well marked. But I didn't mind the idea of exploring a little off the beaten path. The next day, I packed my day pack and set out early, hoping to find a new trail that would lead me further into the heart of the Ruby Mountains. The sun was just starting to rise and the forest was bathed in a soft, golden light. I followed a narrow trail that seemed to curve around a small ridge, and as I hiked, I felt that familiar sense of freedom and excitement. There was nothing but nature, and I was loving it. After a couple of hours, the trail began to fade, growing fainter with each step. The trees thickened, and the path became more difficult to follow. But I was determined to keep going. I figured it was just a forgotten part of the trail, and I didn't mind the extra challenge. I pressed on until I came across something unexpected. A village. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I stepped forward, the buildings came into focus. Dilapidated houses made of stone and wood. Some collapsed and others barely standing. There was no sign of life, no sounds of animals or birds, just a heavy, oppressive silence. The village looked abandoned, forgotten by time. The air felt cold despite the warm weather. I walked through the village cautiously, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The houses were old, with cracked windows and sagging roofs. The doors were open, swinging in the wind as though they hadn't been touched in years. I stepped inside one of the houses, my flashlight casting long shadows across the dusty floor. There were old, rotting furniture, remnants of a life long gone. But what struck me the most was the strange symbols carved into the walls, lines and shapes that seemed to shift when I looked away. I left the house and walked deeper into the village, my heart beginning to race. There was something wrong about this place. I could feel it in my bones. It wasn't just the abandonment. It was the sense that something had been left behind, something that didn't belong in this world. As I continued to explore, I came across a small, run-down chapel at the center of the village. The door was slightly ajar, and the faint scent of decay lingered in the air. I pushed the door open, and inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. There were more of the strange symbols etched into the walls and on the floor. The chapel was empty, save for an altar at the far end. But as I stepped closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the altar, there was an old book. Its pages were yellowed with age, and it was covered in dust. But what caught my attention was the fact that it was open, as if someone had been reading it recently. The pages were filled with strange writings, written in a language I couldn't understand. At the bottom of one page, there was a drawing, a symbol that looked disturbingly familiar. It was the same symbol I had seen carved into the walls of the houses. I backed away from the altar, my stomach churning. The whispers started then, low, almost inaudible at first, but growing louder with each passing second. They sounded like voices, like people speaking in a language I couldn't comprehend. I turned toward the door, but before I could leave, I heard a noise behind me. A soft shuffle, like footsteps in the dust. I whirled around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, now almost a frantic, unintelligible murmur that seemed to come from all around me. My vision blurred, and I felt a cold, creeping dread settle into my bones. I ran out of the chapel, back toward the village entrance, but the whispers followed me. I stumbled through the abandoned streets, desperately trying to find the trail I had come in on. The village seemed to stretch on forever, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I broke free of the village and found the trail again. I didn't stop to look back, I just ran, my breath ragged, until I finally reached my RV. I didn't bother with packing up. I just started the engine and drove, the haunting whispers echoing in my mind. I've never returned to the Ruby Mountains. The village I found doesn't appear on any maps, and no one I've spoken to has ever heard of it. But I know what I saw. I know that something ancient and wrong still lingers there, hidden from the world. And I'm sure that I wasn't meant to find it. There are some places in this world that should stay forgotten, and the Ruby Mountains are one of them. My name is Mark, and I've been camping all my life. I've hiked trails from coast to coast, spent nights in the wild, and loved every second of it. But there was one trail in the Ruby Mountains that I'll never forget. One trail that led me to something I'll never be able to explain. I had been hearing rumors for years about the Ruby Mountains, their beauty, the wild terrain, the isolation. I was drawn to them, especially after hearing about the hidden, lesser-known trails that wind through the forest. So, when I finally had the chance, I packed up my RV and headed out, eager to explore. I arrived at a quiet campsite near the base of the mountains, surrounded by towering pines and distant peaks. The night was crisp, and the silence was so profound, it felt like the world had stopped. I knew this was going to be a special trip. The next morning, I decided to take one of the trails I'd read about. It wasn't marked on any official maps, but I'd gotten a tip from a local ranger that it was a secluded route, perfect for someone looking to escape the crowds. I loaded up my pack and set off early, feeling the thrill of adventure in my chest. At first, the trail was beautiful, meandering through thick forest, with sunlight filtering through the leaves. The ground was soft underfoot, and the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. I thought to myself, this is paradise. This is why I came here. But as I continued, something strange began to happen. The trail seemed to shift. It wasn't dramatic at first, just subtle changes, like the path narrowing, or the trees getting denser. But soon, it became impossible to follow the trail as I had before. I stopped, looked around, and realized that what I had thought was the path had completely vanished. I turned around, trying to retrace my steps, but the trees and underbrush seemed to have closed in behind me. I couldn't find the trailhead, and I couldn't even see the spot where I'd come from. Everything looked the same. Endless rows of trees, a dense forest that seemed to swallow up the light. My heart started to race. I had been hiking for hours, but now I was disoriented. I decided to keep moving forward, hoping the trail would reappear, but it didn't. Instead, I began to feel that creeping sensation, the one that tells you something is wrong. I was being watched. I kept walking, the forest growing darker and more oppressive with each step. The air felt thick, as though it were closing in around me. I called out, but my voice seemed swallowed by the trees. No echo, no response, just silence. Then I heard something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was another hiker, someone else lost on the trail. But when I turned around, there was no one there. I stopped, holding my breath, trying to listen. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I spun around again, but once more, there was nothing. A chill ran through me. I wasn't alone. I started to walk faster, panic setting in. The footsteps followed me, always just behind, but when I glanced back, I saw nothing. The trees seemed to press in tighter, the path more twisted and confusing. I couldn't understand it. I had been on this trail earlier that morning, and now it was as if the forest itself was toying with me, changing its shape and leading me deeper into some nightmare. I pushed on, telling myself to stay calm, but my mind was racing. The whispers started then, soft and indistinct at first like the wind, but the longer I walked, the clearer they became. Low voices murmuring in a language I couldn't understand, floating in the air around me. The ground underfoot seemed to shift, like the earth itself was shifting with the whispers. I reached a clearing and saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A figure standing in the middle of the clearing. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its body was covered in shadows that seemed to ripple and distort as I watched. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, staring at me with hollow, dark eyes that seemed to absorb all the light around it. I froze, unable to look away. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the figure itself was the source of the voices. The air felt cold, even though the day had been warm. I didn't wait for the figure to move or for anything else to happen. I turned and ran, faster than I've ever run in my life. I could hear the footsteps behind me again, getting closer, the whispers growing louder. I didn't know what was chasing me, but I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. I ran for what felt like hours, the forest around me a blur, until I finally stumbled back to the trail I had originally come from. I didn't stop to look around. I just kept running, my legs burning, until I reached the campsite. When I finally made it back to my RV, I collapsed inside, shaking. I could still hear the whispers, faint but persistent, drifting through the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring out the window, waiting for the sun to rise. The next morning, I packed up my things and left without a second thought. I've never gone back to the Ruby Mountains, and I never will. Whatever I encountered out there was something that shouldn't have been. Some trails, I've learned, lead to places better left undiscovered. My name is Alex, and I've always been drawn to the solitude of the outdoors, the peacefulness, the quiet. There's nothing like it. So when I decided to take a trip to the Ruby Mountains in Nevada, I thought it was going to be the perfect way to unwind. Little did I know, I was about to experience something I'll never be able to explain. It was late fall, the kind of crisp weather that makes camping in the mountains feel like a real adventure. I parked my RV at a small, off-the-beaten-path campsite near the foothills of the Ruby Mountains. The air was fresh, the sky clear, and there wasn't another soul in sight. It felt like paradise. After setting up camp and cooking some dinner, I decided to enjoy the night by the fire. The flames crackled and danced in the cool air as I relaxed, listening to the sounds of nature. But as the night wore on, something strange started happening. The forest around me began to feel alive in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the usual sounds of nature, no rustling leaves or chirping birds, but an odd stillness that made me uncomfortable. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I pushed it out of my mind, chalking it up to being tired from the drive. I sat there, staring into the fire, when I noticed something moving at the edge of the trees. It was too far away to make out clearly, but it looked like someone, or something, was standing just beyond the firelight, watching me. I squinted, but when I looked again, there was nothing there. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, maybe a deer or a shadow from the firelight. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I tried to shake it off, but the unease settled deep in my chest. Suddenly, I heard it. A soft, faint whisper. It was so quiet at first that I thought it might have been the wind, but as it continued, I realized it was more than that. It was the sound of voices, soft and low, like they were coming from just beyond the trees, just out of reach. I leaned forward, straining to hear, but the voices faded as quickly as they started. I was on edge now. My nerves were shot, but I tried to focus on the fire. But then, the whispering came again, this time louder, more distinct. The words were inaudible, but the tone was unmistakable. It was like someone was standing just outside the firelight, speaking in hushed tones to someone else, but I couldn't see them. I grabbed my flashlight, my pulse quickening. I shone it into the trees, scanning the shadows, but the light revealed nothing. No movement, no shapes, just the dark, still forest. But then, in the distance, I saw it. A flicker of light. A campfire. It was small at first, like the glow of a single flame, but it grew larger, the warmth of it seeming to radiate in the cold night air. I thought I was hallucinating, but the fire was too real, too bright to be a figment of my imagination. There was no campsite in that direction, just the forest. Curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I grabbed my jacket and decided to investigate. I walked slowly, following the faint light through the trees, my mind racing. The whispering continued in the background, and the closer I got to the campfire, the more the voices seemed to overlap, like many people speaking at once. It was as if the fire was calling me in. When I reached the clearing where the fire was, my blood ran cold. The campfire was burning brightly, but there was no one around it. No one sitting, no one standing, just the fire burning in the center of the clearing. It wasn't like a normal campfire. There was no wood, no kindling. It seemed to burn with a strange, unnatural intensity, as if something else was feeding it. The flames danced unnaturally, twisting in odd directions, like they were trying to communicate. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I heard the voices again. But this time, they were clear. They were calling my name. Alex! I froze, my mind racing. The sound came from the campfire, but it wasn't like any voice I'd ever heard before. It was distorted, like it was coming from beneath the earth, a low growl mixed with a whisper. Alex! I turned to leave, but before I could take a single step, the temperature dropped. The air grew icy cold, and a sudden gust of wind sent the trees around me swaying violently. I stumbled backward, my flashlight slipping from my grip and falling into the fire. The flame flickered, then exploded in a burst of light. I was thrown to the ground by the force of it, and when I got back to my feet, I found myself alone in the clearing. The fire was gone. The voices were gone. The air was thick with an unnatural silence. There was nothing there but the dark, empty forest. I didn't waste a second. I turned and ran back to my RV, stumbling through the underbrush, my heart racing with terror. I didn't stop running until I was safely inside my vehicle. I locked the doors, turned on the lights, and waited for the sun to come up. I don't know what happened that night in the Ruby Mountains, but I'll never forget the feeling of those voices calling me, or the fire that seemed to burn without reason. I left the mountains at first light and haven't been back since. Some places are meant to be left alone. And the Ruby Mountains? They're one of those places. I've spent most of my life hiking and camping in some of the most remote places across the country. The silence, the wild beauty, the solitude. It's what I've always craved. But when I set out to camp in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada, I quickly learned that not all silence is peaceful. Some of it hides something far darker. This is the story of why I'll never step foot near that mountain range again. It started with a simple plan. Just me, my RV, and the Ruby Mountains. I had heard tales about the area being isolated, wild, and breathtaking, but I didn't know the half of it. It had been a rough few months for me. Work had been stressful, relationships had fallen apart, and I needed to get away from everything. I found a remote spot off the main roads near the western foothills of the Ruby Mountains, tucked into a small clearing that appeared on an old map I had. It looked perfect, quiet, and isolated. I had no idea that the location was steeped in stories from locals about strange things happening in those woods. I arrived just before sunset, the golden light filtering through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. The mountains rose in the distance, their jagged peaks looming in the twilight. I parked my RV, set up camp, and prepared a modest dinner. It felt good to be out in nature again, far from the noise and stress of daily life. But there was something about the place, a strange sense of being watched that I couldn't shake. I brushed it off as the typical anxiety of being alone in the woods. As night fell, I started a fire and sat down next to it, enjoying the peace and quiet. I gazed up at the stars, and for the first time in a long while, I felt relaxed. But as the fire crackled and popped, I began to hear something I didn't expect. Whispers. Soft at first, just a faint murmur on the edge of my hearing, like voices in the distance. I figured it was the wind moving through the trees or the sound of animals in the underbrush. But as time went on, the whispers grew louder, and they started to sound more distinct. They weren't animal sounds. They weren't the wind. "Get out! Go!" I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My first instinct was to write it off as my mind playing tricks, the isolation getting to me. But the whispers continued. Faint at first, but they started to sound almost urgent. "Leave this place. Leave now." I stood up, my heart racing. I looked around the campsite, but there was no one. No other campers. No other sounds except for the crackling of the fire. The forest around me was still and quiet, save for those persistent whispers. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint where they were coming from, but they seemed to be all around me, echoing in the trees. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the forest, searching for any sign of movement. The deeper I went, the stronger the whispers became. They were no longer just faint murmurs. They were clearer now, like someone was standing just behind me, whispering directly into my ear. "Leave now." I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there, just trees, an endless stretch of tall, dark pines. I started to walk back toward the campsite, but something caught my eye. It was a figure, just a silhouette at first, standing motionless among the trees. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone. My heart pounded in my chest, a chill running down my spine. I rushed back to my camp, grabbed my gear, and was about to get into the RV when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A loud snap. The unmistakable sound of something large stepping on a branch. I turned sharply, my flashlight flicking around the trees. Nothing. But I could feel it. Something was out there, and it wasn't just the wind. I retreated into my RV, locked the door, and sat in the dark for what felt like hours. The whispers didn't stop. They seemed to follow me, like they were coming from deep within the woods, echoing through the trees. No matter how tightly I shut the windows or turned off the lights, The whispers grew louder, more insistent. By dawn, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept at all, my nerves shot, but I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed up my things quickly, not wanting to spend another second in that place. But as I was about to pull out of the campsite, I saw something that stopped me cold. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond where my campfire had been, there was a tree, a massive, twisted pine, its bark dark and gnarled. It looked ancient, and something about it felt off, wrong. I walked toward it, my curiosity getting the better of me, and that's when I saw it. Carved into the trunk of the tree were words. They were old, worn by time, but they were clear enough to read. They read, "The whispers know you. You are never alone." I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I jumped into my RV and floored the accelerator, driving down the mountain road as fast as I could, barely able to keep my hands on the wheel. The entire time I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something, anything, lurking in the rearview mirror. I made it out of the Ruby Mountains by midday, and as I passed through the small town at the base of the range, I stopped at a gas station. I needed to refuel, but more than that, I needed answers. The attendant, an older man with a weathered face, looked at me curiously when I asked about the whispers and the strange carvings on the tree. His expression darkened immediately. "You didn't go up to that clearing, did you?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper itself. I did," I replied, confused. "Why? What's going on there?" He glanced around as if to make sure no one was listening. "That place is cursed," he said, lowering his voice even further. "People have been hearing those whispers for years. It's not just the wind. Someone wants you to leave. But once you've been there, once you've heard them, you're marked. You can't escape. The whispers follow you. And the tree, it's been there for generations. No one knows who carved those words, but they say it's the same for everyone who hears the whispers. You never really leave." I didn't stay long after that. I left the station and never looked back. To this day, I have never returned to the Ruby Mountains. I don't care how beautiful or peaceful they seem. I'm not foolish enough to tempt fate again. Every now and then, though, when I'm alone in the quiet of my home, I still hear the whispers. Soft, faint, as if they're just beyond my reach. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, feeling like I'm not alone. And every time, I remember the warning. Once you've heard the whispers, you can never truly escape. The Ruby Mountains will always have a hold on me, and I know I'll never be the same.